this is Professor Doyle Young. We're on Chapter 10, and we're again into the application of leadership to getting results in organizations. And nothing is probably more clearly felt in terms of leadership behavior and effectiveness is with individuals and teams. This particular chapter is talking about groups, teams, and their leadership. And so it's very appropriate in this world of fast change to talk explicitly about organizational performance as it relates to teams and groups and work units. This is, as the book indicates, sort of the buzzword of this new era of worldwide growth in organizations is the emphasis on teams. That is getting work done through and with teams. Those teams can be 2 people, it could be 1,000 people, but typically they are defined more by smaller work groups that have either a functional relationship, that is, it's a hierarchy of an organization where people are reporting into the leader, and it might be actually all the reports, direct reports of that particular leader. And if you were to stair step and take a pyramid where the leader is at the top and the followers that are reporting into them, that would be a team. We'd like to be thinking teams in terms of teams that have a very cohesive quality to them, that they are come together around for a fixed period of time around the accomplishment of the organization's goals, mission, and objectives. So one team is more functional. The other kind of team are teams that are brought together for a period of time and then disband. They might be a project, new product development in an organization. They might be around a particular event or a limited process that has a beginning and end to it. So teams in that regard, can really, again, come together and then end their work when that particular end of that project is phased out. The organizations that we know that are performing very well, one of the hallmarks of well-performing organizations is the evidence of well-performing teams. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman general and leader of Rome, said that we are born for cooperation, as are the feet, the hands, the eyelids, and the upper and lower jaws. Talking of how we talk, speaking of how people communicate with each other. So groups and teams are different than solely the skills, abilities, and values and motives of those who comprise them. Groups are essential. As we're talking here too, if leaders are to impact anything beyond their own behavior. So group perspective looks at how different groups' characteristics can affect relationships, both with the leader and among the followers. Individuals versus groups, the book goes into some overview of. Team members usually have a stronger sense of identification amongst themselves than do group members. Teams have common goals or tasks, and task independence typically is greater with teams than with groups. So as you go through those characteristics, I would encourage you to get grounded on what the characteristics and the nature of groups and teams. In an earlier chapter, I think the chapter on motivation, we talked about motivating versus satisfiers or hygiene factors. But I'd like to do as we move into this chapter and the lecture on talking about teams and groups, I would like to bring up 4 key factors that are inherent not only as it relates to motivating individuals, but also in motivating and creating environments for groups and teams that are productive. And I'd like to speak to 4 of those, and I'll list them first and I'll define them. Achievement, affiliation, affluence, and autonomy. Those 4 factors are extremely critical, and it comes right out of the research in how we motivate individuals and we motivate and create environments for team functioning. And I'll define those for you, Achievement is the extent to which people want to get things done or accomplish something tangible. Affiliation is the extent to which people want to associate with other people. 3, affluence, this is the extent to which people want to have influence or control and power. And lastly, autonomy, this is the extent to which people want to have freedom from controls. So in terms of forming groups and teams, it's very important to understand that these 4 factors are operating in all of those situations. I'd like to also talk a little bit about the factors that create high-performing teams outside of the 4 that I just mentioned to you. These 4 that I just gave you were sort of baseline around creating environments where people find motivating in individuals and teams, and I bring them back up again because I think they're important for teams. But here are several in terms of how organizations can create high-performing teams that have a characteristic have these characteristics. Okay, so I'm going to give you about 7 or 8 of these, and this is again supplemental to the text. You won't find these in the text. There is one key strategy. It starts with its organizational clarity for teams and groups. It's the degree to which the goals and plans of the organization are clearly perceived by the team members. Secondly, there's decision-making structure, which is to say that the information flows through the organizational structure, and that organizational structure can facilitate positive outcomes. Thirdly, there's organizational integration, the extent to which the various subunits or groups, individuals within those groups cooperate and communicate effectively towards the achievement of the overall objectives. Fourthly, is we talked about management style or our leadership style, and that is the extent to which people perceive encouragement to use their own initiative to performing the jobs. Feel free to question constraints and sense support from higher levels of management when needed. Fifthly is performance orientation. You know, we talked about one of the outcomes of behavior is performance. And with groups, teams especially, there is an organizational performance orientation. That's the extent of emphasis placed upon individual accountability for clearly defined end results and high levels of performance. So the performance is really stated in terms of why this team, for example, is coming together. What are the objectives for the team working together? What are the performance outcomes, if you will, for this team to perform very, very well? Those are articulated. And in the best ones, they are quantified. That is, they're divisible by some number. Sixthly, there is organizational vitality in high-performing teams. Excuse me. The extent to which people see the organization as a dynamic one, as reflected by the venturesomeness of its goals, the innovativeness of its decisions, and its responsiveness to changing conditions. So organizational vitality is incredibly important. It's something that people sense is operating in the organization. Next, there's compensation. Excuse me. There's compensation, the extent to which the compensation system is seen as equitable, competitive, and related to performance. This is incredibly important as a satisfier that Hertzberg talks about earlier versus a motivator. And there's human resource development is the last factor, which is a strategy around how organizations create high-performing teams. The extent to which individuals perceive opportunities within the organization and allow people to develop on their own. These are critical strategies for organizations who want to develop high-performing teams. I'd like to shift out of this now and talk and emphasize just several other factors in the chapters. I'll highlight. I would encourage you to understand in the reading what the stages of group development are: forming, storming, norming, and performing. I think that's section 4 point, let's see here. That would be on chapter page 442 and 443. That's really a nice way to see how groups come together. Those stages that are outlined there are important because people are in many maybe in leaderless groups more than they realize, and the potential for relationships between leaders and behaviors and group cohesiveness and productivity is really quite important. How do some groups get into problems? The types of roles or problems in groups, I would encourage you to go through that, take a look at that. Take a look at group norms. Norms are informal rules groups adopt to regulate and regularize group member behavior. So understand group norms. How group cohesion, how do you know if you have group cohesion? Cohesion is a glue that keeps a group together. Highly cohesive groups interact and influence each other in very positive ways. Cohesive groups tend to have lower turnover and absenteeism. You will want to emphasize what groupthink is, and I encourage you to understand that concept in some detail. People in cohesive groups often become more concerned with striving for unanimity than objectively appraising different courses of action. Groupthink is one of the great blocks to getting groups effectively focused to performance, where people need to recognize that their relationships are critical, that those are not in jeopardy if they disagree with other people. Effective team characteristics, we sort of talked about those in terms of strategies, what it's important to look at in terms of the 4-factor system: autonomy, achievement, affiliation, and affluence. We talked about that. We talked about some of the strategies earlier. It's important to recognize in the chapter figure 10.1 that there's an organizational shell. That is, teams that are at work are operating within the organization, obviously, between the reasons why the group is formed or the team is formed, what industry they sit within, and the environment that's impacting that organization. If you want a refresher, go back to the very initial lecture on organizational change. That'll give you some idea of the environmental factors that are impacting the organization. But those teams that are at work are operating within very defined tasks, very clear boundaries, with delegated authority and norms that are operating there all the time. If you go to figure 10.2 and systems theory, we talked about systems theory early on in one of the earlier lectures, but the emphasis here in this particular section of the lecture or the book is around organizational systems that are always operating, okay? And those systems essentially support individuals and teams in getting their work done. The organization is a living system with a lot of interrelated parts that the management and leadership of the organization set up in order to help people do their work. There is a concept not mentioned in this chapter that I would like to sort of to mention here. It's called an organizational team charter. And it's a tool used by organizations, essentially anywhere from 1 to 4 pages, that is a description of teams that are focused on particular projects. So a project might be rolling a new product out. It might be doing research on a market opportunity. It might be providing data and information to a particular customer or client. But this team charter is a way for the team to essentially summarize why that team is performing on that particular project. What are the objectives of the project? What are the resources of the project? What are the timelines of that project? Who is chartering? What leader in the organization above a leader, let's say, is chartering this work to be done, or that particular leader is chartering this work to be done? What are the sources of value creation with that charter? That is to say, what, as a result of that work, is the value to the performance of that particular project or work? What will it do in terms of, if it's done at its optimum and its best, for the user of that product and service? Another section of the charter would be resources required, and certainly project timeline and schedules. I'm finding an increasing number of organizations are going to a charter for teams in order to be very clear as a communication tool around what's the nature of the work to be done and how well the organization wants it done, and again, what's the application to the value of that team coming together in terms of an improvement or a outcome that that effort is looking to secure. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit more about the importance of people coming together in a team. And the team, if you look at figure 10.7, talks about factors of a normative model of effectiveness and interactional framework, and there are essentially three parts of that, which is the organizational context, there is the leader himself or herself in terms of assessing process or criteria to get the work done, that is their ability to coach and design and model what is necessary for others in the organization to achieve what they want to. And then there is individual factors in there. So it's the interest by people to be motivated, the skills and abilities they bring to it, along with the values and their attitudes and their interpersonal behaviors. So, you know, when you take this model, the factors, and superimpose it on work to be done, you essentially always see that there's three components. There's the leader, there's the individual, and then there's the team itself in terms of the task structures, the context of what they're trying to do to get work done there. So we are getting really much better, I think, organizationally, to understand the dynamics working in teams and across teams, and how followers participate, or team members, within those organizational settings. And we're also very good at understanding different leadership models. I hope you found this interesting summary to this chapter 10. Thank you very much.